Hey everybody, I'm April Cummings. This is EDBEAT. I'm going to switch myself on the left because I'm left-handed. Okay, in my world it's left. In your world it's right. But I feel weird. I have to be on this side. Patrick has to be on that side, or I get confused. He's like, what is she talking about? It's EDBEAT, everybody, which is a very regular education-focused video podcast that also gives me an opportunity for Patrick to show me how smart he is, and I just try to, go along for the ride. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, April. How are you?
Not enough coffee for one day, that's for sure. All right, so stuff to talk about this week once again. Actually, a lot more than I thought we were going to have to talk about this week. Because, I'm like, what's going on in education this week? Man. And then Patrick says, we have things happening.
Loads, April.
Loads and loads. For those of you joining us for the first time, Patrick is with Cayman Current, and it is education focused, as we alluded to, hence the name EDBEAT. And also, he keeps track of all things going on in education in the Cayman Islands. So what's on the agenda this week, or that's already on the proverbial air, as I like to call things online being on air? What's headlining this week?
Well, for the past couple weeks now, week or so, we've been really diving into the recently released education data report. And so people who don't know, this is the government's big annual report breaking down everything that's happening basically in the public school system in regards to test scores and attendance and special education needs and all sorts of things. So the report is chock full of information, so much so that we are breaking it down and writing a series of, it's probably going to be 6 or 7 stories just based on the contents of the data report. And this is for the school year ending in spring 2021. So it takes them a while to get the test results back and break them down and analyze it. So that's what we've been doing at the Current. And this week, we focused on 2 topics, and one is about students' mathematics scores, and the second one is about comparing the performance of the public high schools. So that's John Gray, Clifton Hunter, and then Layman Scott High School on the BRAC.
So I think I gave it away when I pulled up the
yes.
pulled up the website.
Surprise.
Headline out. Yes. But like you said, it takes a bit of time to kind of go through the data and also see what it tells us. And your headline says Clifton Hunter significantly outperforms John Gray on year 11 exams.
That's correct. So the story is exactly what the headline is, and that's that year 11 students taking kind of the end of high school external exams. So these are mainly the CSEC exams, the Caribbean Secondary Examinations Council tests, which is put on by I got that acronym totally wrong, but it's put on by CXC, which is the Caribbean Secondary
Council.
Education something test. That's how much I know.
Clearly, Patrick did not go to a Cayman Islands high school.
I did not, but most people call them CXCs.
Yeah, and
even though that also
traditionally
includes
what we said.
The A-level test as well. But it's the external exams. So really, Clifton Hunter High School scored significantly better than John Gray did, and this is following a period of 2 years where John Gray had nearly closed the gap in test scores. And just kind of for historical background is the data is available for this in Cayman since 2015. So going back about 7 years, not that far, but from every year from 2015 to 2020, Clifton Hunter has had a better pass rate than John Gray. And when I say pass rate, I mean the percentage of students who met the national expected standard. And that's getting 5 or more level 2 passes, including in English and mathematics.
Okay.
So Clifton Hunter has had a greater pass rate than John Gray each year, but the margin's always been between 2 and 7 points. In 2021, however, Clifton, I got a fly in here. Clifton Hunter expanded that gap by 17 points. So it was 52% of Clifton Hunter's year 11 students. That's in mathematics. So overall, 49% of Clifton, that actually ties into the second topic about mathematics. So overall, the 49% of Clifton Hunter students got that national expected standard compared to 32% of John Gray students, which is a difference of, that's where you get the 17%. And if you look at these charts and if you zoom in on them, you'll see how the test scores kind of go along, and then they spiked last year in 2020.
Yeah.
And then they drop. And that's something that is addressed by education officials, where because of the pandemic, CSEC and also the GCSEs on the British side, they changed the way they administered the exams, and it seems like that led to kind of scores that were different and higher than in years past. So they're saying, like, don't try to compare 2020 results
To the
with
other years, yeah.
this year or previous years. And as you see on these charts, you'll see this John Gray is kind of this burgundy color,
So that's
and
the
Clifton
one
Hunter
below.
is more of a dark gray. And the line at top, which is yellow, that's Lehman Scott on the BRAC. And so you can see every year Lehman Scott sets the national standard, sets the national bar for exam results. So from 2015 to 2020, Lehman Scott has had an overall pass rate between 12 and 39 percentage points greater than Clifton Hunter, which came in second place. So that gap between Lehman Scott has always been, between Lehman Scott and Clifton Hunter, has always been larger than Clifton Hunter and John Gray.
Right. So that, I think I'm on the right chart for that part right now, right? So it's meeting national expectations, right? And so even if you take the 2020 thing out of the equation, Lehman Scott certainly has, a much higher, percentage of students meeting those expectations. And so, it's easy to focus on kind of these big peaks, but we know that this was not a normal year, not just because of the test, but also everything else that was going on in our lives at the time. So is it safer to look at maybe 2019, going back to 2019 and comparing that to here, 2021? That gives you sort of a better picture, potentially?
And that's what the government education officials are saying, is it's safer to try to compare 2021 to 2019. So just ignore the man behind the curtain in 2020. And what's interesting, though, is in 2021, Clifton Hunter closed that. So it's not just like, say, John Gray had a bad year. It's Clifton Hunter had a good year, because Clifton Hunter closed that gap with Lehman Scott to only 6 percentage points, whereas the closest they had previously gotten ever was 12 points. And if you want to segue into the second topic, really the prime determinant for whether students here meet this national expected standard, which again is 5 level 2 passes, including English and math, it's the math score. That's what students are finding the most challenging. So if a student, year 11 student, is able to pass that math exam, it's really, really likely that they're going to meet that national expected standard. So talking about Lehman Scott versus Clifton Hunter in math, that the gap in the mathematics pass rate was only 3 percentage points. So enough kids that Clifton Hunter were able to pass that math test, that's what brought them so much closer to Lehman Scott.
So you have to look at the scores, and you kind of compare and contrast what's going on. But of course, the natural question is as well to ask is what was happening in the schools that was different from one point to the other, or the same? What changed? And that's always an interesting question, I think, to sort of dig our teeth into at times, because sometimes a school will do something like have a specific emphasis on this particular area, different strategies, different techniques, and then other times it's just this particular crop of young people happen to be really good at math.
Yeah.
But I always find that an interesting analysis to sort of go through. And once you identify what those different points of interest are, then what does that say?
Yeah, and you'll see with Lehman Scott is a much smaller school than Clifton Hunter and John Gray, so you would expect for there to be greater variance between years, because two or three kids maybe meet the do a little better than expected, or maybe show up sick that day and don't do as well. That can cause a bigger swing in the overall pass rate, as you can see. The Lehman Scott line jump around a little bit more.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so pivoting to math, which is everybody's favorite topic, and
I keep trying to avoid it, but it hasn't worked out.
But just kind of putting some numbers behind it, is if you look at since 2015, the overall pass rate. So we're talking on a countrywide level now. The overall pass rate of people meeting students meeting national expectations is between 36 and 42%, and that's excluding 2020. So it's really hovering around this 40% mark. During that time, the pass rate for math has been 40 to 47%. So you can see about 40% of students meet the national standard. Between 40 and 47% of students get math. Meanwhile, you look at English, that range has been 59% to 75% pass rate. So significantly, what I said is many more students pass English than pass math. And the kids who pass math are extremely likely to meet the national standard. And according to the education officials in this report, how they couched it was the number of students who meet national expectations is closely aligned with achievement in mathematics. So if the goal is to increase the percentage of students who meet this national standard, the focus has to be on increasing those math scores.
So they're saying, and just correct me if I'm misinterpreting this here, they're saying, I may be a great English student, blah, 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 but if we focus on the math more than the English, we're more likely to see an overall pass rate.
Yeah, or even you increase the focus on the math while maintaining the focus on English.
The current level of focus on English, yeah. Which kind of makes sense, right? Because if math's the thing that's preventing you from crossing the finish line, then that's what you need. This does, though, raise a question for me when you have such a, and look, I haven't done the work to go see what's the pass rate of achieving the national standards in other places, and how does this national standard compare to other national standards. But my question also, though, is the national standard appropriate or not under the circumstances? It may be interesting. Perfectly fine.
And in a future story in this series, I will be examining how Cayman's CXC results compare to other jurisdictions. This is something I did last year as well. And what you'll find is Cayman is just about at the Caribbean average in both English and mathematics. Last year, Cayman tended to do better on these exams than previous years. So they did better compared to the region than we usually did. So usually we're kind of on the downside in terms of average. Last year we did.
So you're saying we're a little less than the average, but in that range normally. And then last year it was the first year that Cayman students beat the Caribbean average in both English and math. And the scores were like 1 percentage point away from Jamaica. So almost identical to Jamaica. And
But
one thing,
we'll see how it is this year.
so, but the question is in terms of how we were functioning and how Jamaica was functioning. Um, and I don't mean to throw you under the bus because you know I have the memory of a, you know, flea, probably less sometimes. But the question for me being in terms of how kids were learning you know, I don't think we were in lockdown particularly long compared to some other places. We
Correct.
really worked hard on access to technology and trying to support kids. Um, did the other countries, were they play on the same playing field in that respect?
Yeah, I think you'll find, and we do a story from time. I'm glad you brought that up.
How do I bring up these things with no
Every
planning ahead
every
of time?
quarter or so, I actually do a roundup on how different, we call them comparable, our neighbors have,
Hmm.
how their school systems have been functioning throughout the pandemic.
Yep.
And what I found consistently is Cayman has less cases of COVID, we have less deaths, and we have less restrictions. I think up until our bubble burst at the beginning of the school year, we were the only country whose school system had that full, uninterrupted in-person learning in 2020, 21. We were the only
Yeah.
ones. And if you follow, I poach headlines and stories from different publications and put them in a special roundup box on my website. And every now and then you'll get news that, say from Bahamas or from Jamaica, that more schools are opening up and going back into in-person learning. So they're still trying to emerge from that lockdown phase.
So does this perhaps say that the in-person learning was more effective for us um, under that set of circumstances? I'm
Well,
curious about the why. You know,
well,
what is it
no,
that made the
yeah,
difference? Even though the rules changed for all the kids about those tests, we saw improvement
yeah.
in
Well,
a
we
way
had
that
that
I.
was in 2020, so that would be like in the middle of our actual lockdown. So it was really
Mhm.
like everybody had been going up to school till March 2020. Then everybody was shut down, and during the lockdown, our kids took the tests. Whether or not Cayman had some sort of advantage because we were more used to the kids were more used to using technology, or maybe we had
Okay.
better access to technology. I don't
Yeah.
know. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens when I look at the 2021 test results, and
Hmm.
we'll see if our full year of in-person learning, if that helped us comparable to other jurisdictions. But there is a caveat I'm keeping in mind is how many kids in these other jurisdictions actually ended up taking those tests.
Hmm.
Because if they were out of school for the whole year, um,
Some may have
maybe their
chosen to
cohort size
defer.
is a lot smaller. It'll be something I'm looking at.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I trust you to dig up the numbers behind it all, but I was really
Yeah,
just very curious about the impact of the different things that were going on at the time. And of course, there's always the emotional challenges that go with, you know, with the experience too. Um, but with someone, you know, for example, who might be challenged with focus, I can see some potential benefits in taking that exam at that particular point, those exams at that particular point in time, because yeah, I kind of, what else was I going to do? I was going to study, you know.
yeah,
I mean, it sounds
yeah.
crazy, but
And you had also brought up the Cayman's national expectation, which is, the level
mhm.
5+2 is what they call it. And that's interesting because it's in line with what the UK's national expected standard is. But the UK, in recent years, the UK has been trying to move away from that kind of focus. Um, so so I don't know, maybe as Cayman's public school curriculum is getting more aligned with the UK curriculum, and even the testing is going to be aligned with it more. I think uh, maybe that national standard changes as well to something more holistic.
Yeah, I am curious about that as well. You know, this may just be because I happened to look at a few textbooks and went, whew, don't think I could have passed that at at that
Yeah,
age. Like, wow. And even in some of the other subject areas, um, I was like, yeah, some of this is pretty challenging. And also in terms of the the language, how it's presented. There are just so many variables involved, not to mention good test taking skills. And remember, I did go, even though I had almost all my education came in, I did go through the British version, if you will, in the morning. And that would be primary school. And then as I seasoned in life, I ended up transitioning to the US system. And so even switching between the two vocabularies, it's an interesting challenge, especially if you have a weakness in an area, because you're not only trying to deal with your weakness in a particular thing, but you're also translating between, is this the American thing, or is this the British thing, or is this the Caribbean thing? And so it can be hard to switch back and forth when you're already trying to learn something that's challenging. And we do have quite the international population in Cayman as well. So I imagine that some of that might factor in as well in some instances.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, and so moving on with a bright spot in mathematics. And so, of course, parents know students don't only get tested in year 11, they get tested every few years all the way throughout. So one of the big years that the government looks at in their data report is year 6, which is into primary school. And so at the beginning of the year, the kids take something known as a CAT-4 test, which it's supposed to be designed to measure a student's ability to reason and think and decide if some kid's an audio learner, a spatial learner, this kind of stuff. But one of the outcomes of the test is it's predictive, and it says based on how well these student scores for this percent of kids are expected to perform below expectations, this percent at expectations, and then this percent of kids exceeding expectations. So in the data report, which is a really useful thing they do, is they take those CAT-4 predictions and then they compare it to the actual results. So you can see, okay, did the kids who were supposed to pass actually pass? Did the kids who are supposed to exceed? And of course, the goal is to take kids from where they are at the beginning of the year and move them farther along in progress than might have been predicted by the test. And in the maths arena, 0%, round number, 0% of kids were predicted to be able to exceed expectations in mathematics, and actually 8% of the kids exceeded expectations. And then along the same lines, 42% of kids were expected to perform below expectations. Actually, 37% of kids performed below expectations. So more kids passed than were expected, and more kids did exceptionally well than were expected. And so according to the data report, they say this performance augurs well for the future. So if the kids continue along the same progress, the year 6 kids, this cohort coming up, should perform significantly higher than the current rates. We'll see.
So, and that goes back to this, that's a benchmark for them, right? I mean, I don't mean the students themselves as individuals, but I mean from a system perspective. If I see where people tested and then I see, I'm working on trying to get them there, I learn lessons that I can then ideally fold back in for the next cohorts of students over time. So this particular report card is as much about our education system and our schools and our teachers as it is about our students and their learning.
Yeah, and I will say, and this is a preview coming up for this week, and is actually a story that came up out with me as I was, they call it interrogating the data. So you have a lot of data, and then you look at it and you say, well, what is this actually telling me? And I went looked at the CAT-4 results, which are the predictive results, and I compared this year to last year, and I'll tell you that the predicted results for this group of kids after the school closure were significantly lower than the students had recorded the year before the closure. Is that evidence of an immediate learning gap, or is it evidence of perhaps they were administering the Cat 4 test differently than the preceding year? I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's something I'm looking into now. Is
Yeah.
because that's one question I've had, and that we talked to DES schools director Mark Ray about, is trying to assess what, if any, and what the level of effect on students' learning there has been because of COVID.
Yeah. And as I recall, too, we have seen some changes in terms of curriculum over the past few years, which comes with it a learning curve, for lack of a better phrase. It comes with it a learning curve, both for the students and for the teachers. And so those kinds of transitions can also have an impact. And I think when we talked to Mr. Ray, they were they were in the process of analyzing some data. I don't remember which data specifically, but it can take a bit too to do exactly what you're doing, which is interrogate the data, see, look for those areas that show what you expect, what you didn't expect, and examining the whys. That can be extraordinarily useful as a tool for planning going forward, both from a micro curriculum. What are my lessons plans and what do I need to incorporate differently, as well as on a bigger overall strategic basis. So there's a lot to be learned, and I think sometimes we want it to be an easy A, if you will. Look, everyone passed fabulously and it's all good, and instead of saying, even when we have a positive, we still need to examine that carefully because there are things it can tell us that we need to be paying attention to. As someone who's not teaching, I want an easy fix for every single problem that goes on in the schools, right? But it is not always that simple to do. And there are a lot of factors to take into play. So this sort of data analysis is really critical, I think, to continuing to progress. And even when you have a rough year or a rough area, going back and going through all of this stuff really does help give you some perspective for what you're going to do going forward.
Yep.
Absolutely right, April. It's like I read your stories already and knew what they said. Okay, maybe not so much. All right, so I know we've kind of touched on this a bit, but I know there were a couple other areas we wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Speaking of CXC exams, some
Yes.
students will be very disappointed, and others might be less disappointed to know that the start of the exams was supposed to start tomorrow, and it's been delayed. So they're not going to start for another 3 weeks. And that's a decision that came from the test administrators, the Caribbean Examination Council, and they told the countries about it last Wednesday. So don't blame Cayman school officials for this one. They're rolling with the punches, just like we are.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the assumption for some might be more time to prepare equates to better results. That is not always the case. Sometimes it's like a marathon, to be honest. It's there's a rhythm to preparing for these sorts of exams, and when that rhythm is disrupted, it can actually have a detrimental effect on the students, even though they have more time because they've paced out how things are going to get done. And the other problem is on the other end of the equation, right? So it takes a longer time for you to find out how you did. It's already late enough, but this kind of thing is how you can end up in a program that you're not really ready for
yes
early, as we've seen occur before.
Yeah, we talked about that in a previous episode of EDBEAT about how delayed release of the 2021 test results resulted in some kids ending up in the dual enrollment program with SciFec and UCCI who may have been better off in a different program.
Yeah, and vice versa the other way. Vice versa the other way. That's redundant, but the same problem in the other direction. And so the longer it takes to finish some of these things, and I mean, I've come up with my education philosophy that says education's not a race. we don't have to catch up and graduate at a specific age and have every degree in the pocket at a certain point and then life begins. I'm going with the whole, hey, look, it's a journey and we learn along the way, and it's good to have goals, but we flexibility and resilience are important characteristics, as we've learned the past couple of years, and that your educational journey may take some twists and turns you don't expect. So I'm not the hardcore, like, if you haven't done this by 17.5, your life is over. And there does sometimes feel like there's a lot of pressure about that, but it is still, for the kids who are focused and driven and on their path, it can be very difficult to have to adapt in that way, or get halfway through and have to shift direction again. So I don't know. I hear sirens. So I think that it's a loud neighborhood this week.
What'd you
It's a loud
do?
neighborhood. Nothing this time. It wasn't me. It's a song, isn't it? Okay, never mind. I don't think that's appropriate for EDBEAT. So that said, we saw the delay of the exams. There's still a few bits and pieces that I think our folks here are waiting on from the greater organization. But again, it does pose some potential challenges, and if nothing else, adapting to a change that people really weren't counting on.
Yes.
Okay, just
Yeah,
checking.
flexibility and resilience is important.
We need those, very much so. All right, so
I've got one more thing.
No, you do, and I didn't want to forget to pull it up here on the back. Let me see where it is. I'm trying, so folks, I'm trying very hard to pretend as though I am very technically adept, but what I'm not saying is that, quite vainly, I'm in my glasses, so I really can't see a thing today. So I'm squinting a lot. All right, Patrick, I think I found the relevant story.
There you go.
Go for it.
Yes, so we have some personnel news. So St. Ignatius Catholic School has named its next principal. He's a British educator named Simon Testa, and he's going to start in August 2022. And this information was sent out in a letter from the parish administrator, Father Naveen D'Souza, who told parents that the school board, school advisory committee, and the council that oversees the parish had supported Testa's appointment as principal. And I called him a British educator, but I kind of hedged a little bit on this because he spent the vast majority of his career in international positions, including in New Zealand, Malta, China. I believe he's in Dubai right now, in UAE. Pakistan and Malaysia. So he's a real international educator who's going to be coming down to St. Ignatius. And this is, I suppose this is what makes this significant as a news event, maybe more so than other principal appointments at other schools, is St. Ignatius has had, let's say, government school inspectors have flagged the vacancy in the head principal position as a significant concern consistently over the past year and a half, ever since the school departed. And even with, as people who read the Current know, school inspectors this year have looked at more than 36 schools since January 1. I visited them doing one-day thematic visits, which I like that word.
Yeah,
so they're kind of abbreviated school inspections. And out of the 36 schools, St. Ignatius was the only one where they raised an official notice of concern with the Ministry of Education, saying, hey, this is something serious we need to look at. And that highlighted staff well-being, governance arrangements, which is kind of a technical administrative thing, but then also the continued principal vacancy. So the appointment of Testa at least would address one of those three points that were raised.
And I think we have discussed quite some time ago the sort of the importance of leadership in education, and how at times I didn't fully understand just how critical a component that was from the perspective of the health of your education system. So I'm thinking to myself, well, if a private school doesn't have a principal, what's the big deal? That's their,
Yeah.
but no, it's actually about this is a whole ecosystem of education in the country. And so it's really important to make sure that we stay on top of trying to ensure that everything that's provided is as good, as high quality as it can be, because the people who go through these schools will be the people who, lead the country, have the jobs, do the things, are the future. So if leadership is an important part of a good school, a school without leadership would be a cause for concern. And this is very similar to some of the accreditation sort of criterion that in the US system, for example, I've seen quite frequently. College and university level, they look very carefully at a number of factors, and this is one of them. So it does make sense that it would be a cause for concern, particularly during such a period of crisis. COVID is challenging to say the least, and so now remains to be seen, how it goes. But it's something Patrick can check off that follow-up list. Nailed.
Yes.
Follow it up.
Yes.
And
I've already made a connection on LinkedIn to Mr. Testa, and very soon I'll be harassing him for an interview.
As well, you should. The other thing that and this is because of a sort of a recent experience personally, but the international experience can be quite. Several teachers from the U.S. that I know and have talked to, when they've actually, sat down and talked to me about what their experience through COVID and the schools in the U.S. has been like, particularly in some of the schools that were in challenged areas, in some cases, some charter schools as well. Some of the things that they experienced going through were heartbreaking to hear, to be frank with you. It's really, it made it look like child's play, some of what we've experienced here, even though it's very, these issues are always serious wherever they are. And there seems to be a trend in some of these teachers who they just need a reboot almost to remember why they're teaching again. There seems to be a trend of people traveling now internationally as teachers to see what else is out there, what other systems are like. And so international schools seems to be quite a draw for people, both at the administrative level and leadership level, as well as as just any kind of professional educator. So I'm interested. I'm seeing sort of people go from market to market, city to city, country to country. And I'm curious whether in the long run for them that brings more when they come to Cayman, or whether it makes it more challenging. So that'll be one of those things I think I'd love to hear, just that perspective on, what does your other experience help you bring here, but also in what ways do you have to keep an open mind about what you're coming to and who we are, and what the island and the school culture is like.
Right, and I think when we've spoken to Jim Urquhart at Cayman International School, who has this similar background in terms of having a few decades going all over the world. I think the more it seemed to me talking to him that the more different places he went to made him, one more experienced and confident in what he was doing, but also more open to the fact that he knows when you get there, it's going to be different, and there's going to be new things there you're not expecting.
And it sounds like an oversimplification sometimes. Yet we know it's going to be different. Of course we do, but knowing it's going to be different and going through that experience of things being sometimes the culture is completely different than what you saw in the brochure, and your goal here is to best serve the educational needs of the population of that school that you've come to serve. So my theory is that there's a develop of flexibility in thinking that is developed by that sort of international experience. But we wait and see. But it'll be good to talk to this new leader at St. Ignatius to kind of hear what their journey's been like, and in some respects, what do you think you can accomplish here?
Right. And I think from what you said earlier about, kind of like who cares what happens at a private school. And one of the things
I didn't mean it to sound like that. I really didn't, but it's
it's true though, and it's valid. Is what makes Cayman is not unique, but one of the defining characteristics of the education system here is just what a large percentage of the country's children are served by the private schools. About 45%. If you look at the UK and US, that's going to be single digits.
Yeah.
It's not so much, they don't play nearly as significant role as private schools in Cayman do in delivering this public good. So for me, it's fair game.
Yeah, and as it should be, I think, because excluding a whole component of the population, it's never good for everyone.
Yeah, and I think
Good
just
for anyone in the end, actually.
and a number I didn't expect until I looked into it is, half the kids in private schools are Caymanian children,
Hmm.
uh, fully
Yeah.
50%. And of course, the other 50%, the non-Caymanian kids, the longer they stay here, the more likely it is they're going to become Caymanian themselves.
Yep.
So, they are local institutions
And
serving the
don't you
local
want your
community.
yeah, and don't you want your new Caymanians to be as best prepared as citizens or future citizens as they can be?
I think
So,
so.
April, stop your preaching, young lady. All right,
Is running
so
for
we
office?
are. I know, nah. They got the
Oh.
speeches, and I like to talk, but they got some speeches they do, and I can't do those, man.
Oof.
I'm like, can we get, what is it? Beginning, middle, and 20 minutes. It's like a Presbyterian or Methodist minister Sunday sermon. You have to be done in 20 minutes so you can go to brunch. You can pray again at the meal, but the thing has to be done. The sermon's got to be over. That's my challenge with that. But anyway, all right. So that wraps things up for us this week. I was going to share a Classroom of the Month video with you, but I'm going to hang on and do that next week.
Oh
Mainly because
man.
I can't find the button without my glasses on, and they're in the drawer. So
Yeah.
so I will share this with you this coming week. And anything else you want to share with folks before we take off and go do laundry and the other actual real things that we do besides our jobs?
No, I think we're good. I think we've got April and I have been discussing having some guests on in the coming soon. So I'm always happy to have these different voices
Yeah,
on. So stay tuned.
yeah. And if there's someone you recommend, all of you, not just you, Patrick, said it backwards again, you, Patrick, that you think would be good for us to talk to or that you'd like to hear from, you can also, feel free to email either of us. You can get Patrick's info at caymancurrent.org. I'm at caymanlife.ky, and, we'll be happy to take a look, see if they're game. And also, if you have specific questions and areas of interest, that's cool as well. Because just because I'm interested in an area or Patrick is, doesn't mean it's necessarily serving, all of you, because we are all a little bit different. So feel free to send in your questions or comments. And, thank you so much for supporting EDBEAT and Cayman Current as well. And hey, remember, it's a nonprofit, Patrick. So people can easily give a little bit of support to Cayman Current anytime. He's like, a
Please.
little bit, please. Don't look so pitiful. Someone buy this man a cup of coffee.